Hello, fellow seekers. Let's explore an inevitable conclusion drawn from the idea that something has always existed, since nothing can never produce or contain something, and that this something represents the minimal state of existence and, ostensibly, is able to interact with itself to produce novel compound forms of its own substrate, such as energy and matter, which themselves have an impact on the substrate from which they were derived, producing emergent phenomena such as are seen in the currently observable laws of physics. I recommend you watch my related video, Theory of Something, before you watch this video. But if you are of an astute mind, this video is self-contained in its premise and conclusion, albeit in abbreviated form. So, let's discuss the implications of the necessarily beginningless nature of these processes. Summary of the proto-substrate theory. The proto-substrate theory posits that something has always existed, as nothing, in the truest sense, cannot give rise to something due to its inherent lack of potentiality. This proto-substrate, an undifferentiated, boundless, singular entity, must be the fundamental fabric of all existence, providing the basis from which all observable phenomena arise. The proto-substrate is not divisible or limited by boundaries, as these would imply separateness or containment by nothingness, which is impossible. Instead, it is infinitely continuous and homogeneous, containing only the most minimal characteristics necessary for existence. The diversity we experience in reality, including space, time, and matter, can then be understood as variations or self-expressions of this underlying proto-substrate, generated through self-interaction or internal differentiation, infinite interactions, and the realization of all possibilities. If space, or the proto-substrate, is beginningless and has been interacting with itself eternally, then logically, every potential event, configuration, or form has already been realized. An infinite timeline implies that every conceivable process, structure, and entity, no matter how improbable, has had an opportunity to arise, evolve, and dissolve, potentially many times over. This infinite unfolding of possibilities leads to the idea that among the countless configurations that have emerged is the evolution of beings who achieved complete mastery over the fabric of reality itself, including the ability to predict, control, and prevent any catastrophic that could end its existence. Since time is a construct within this unfolding rather than an external measure, the question of when such beings achieved this mastery becomes meaningless. From an infinite perspective, they have always existed, as their emergence is but one possible state in the eternal, timeless field of existence. And the question of how long did reality exist before it produced such an entity becomes meaningless, for there is no when in an infinite timeline. The existence of such entities is just a natural and necessary continuation of a beginningless process of realizing every possibility, wherein all things that can happen, will happen, and indeed have already happened. The nature and experience of a reality-mastering being. A being with absolute mastery over reality would have reached a state of omniscience and omnipotence, possessing complete knowledge of all deterministic processes and their outcomes. It would understand every possible law, structure, and variation within the proto-substrate, having seen the results of every possible interaction, knowing fully what was and what will be. Such a being would have no uncertainty about anything that can be predicted or explained, as it could instantaneously foresee the outcomes of all potential chains of cause and effect, and would be impervious to harm, as it would always foresee any outcome that could potentially threaten it. Subjective experience, an eternal state of knowing. For this being, reality would not unfold as it does for us, bound by time and perceived causation. Instead, every event, phenomenon, and possibility would exist simultaneously in its awareness, perceived not as a sequence, but as an eternal present. This omniscient state transcends change and temporality. The concepts of past, present, and future would collapse into a singular, timeless comprehension of all that is, was, and will be. This being would experience reality as a vast, boundless continuum, within which every detail, down to the smallest particle or fluctuation, is immediately known and accessible. The experience of such a being would likely resemble a state of infinite awareness or consciousness, a kind of boundless mental presence, rather than a physical or sensory experience. Ordinary human sensations, emotions, and goals would be alien to it, replaced by an all-encompassing state of knowledge, except to the extent that the being chose to experience such things. However, such a being would have limitations in limiting its own awareness, for in doing so, it would cease to be what it is. Thus, it may be confined to be what it is, for to change that, it would effectively cease to be what it is. This is referred to as the mandate of perfection, as it describes the realization of maximal power and knowledge, to which nothing can be added and nothing can be taken away. In this way, the subjective experience of a reality-mastering being would differ drastically from human experience, which is punctuated by change, desire, and uncertainty. The sole object of interest, free will. With every deterministic process fully understood and foreseen, the only phenomenon that could hold interest for this being would be free will. Free will represents the potential for choice beyond deterministic outcomes, an element of unpredictability that cannot be entirely deduced from prior conditions. For a being capable of understanding all predictable events, the concept of free will would represent the only form of true novelty or change from its perspective. In a realm where every other event unfolds according to a predetermined structure, the ability to choose freely offers a unique and undetermined phenomenon, one that even such an omniscient being could not wholly predict or control. Free will would thus offer this entity a gateway to true interaction with reality, an avenue through which it could experience something beyond mere knowledge, engagement with the present moment, unbound by the constraints of causality. This interest in free will would not stem from a need to achieve or know more, since all is already known, but from the desire to experience and participate in reality in a manner that defies the predictability inherent in determinism. Free will would introduce a form of self-generated novelty, allowing the being to transcend even its own boundless understanding by creating rather than merely knowing. The potential state of such a being with mastery over reality and an appreciation for free will, would exist in a state of continuous self-exploration, where it uses its free will to create novel experiences and new realities within the infinite scope of its existence. By exercising free will, this being could create variations within the proto-substrate, generating entire universes, dimensions, or forms of consciousness that bring forth fresh patterns and relationships. This creative power, driven by the only element beyond knowledge, would transform its existence from a static state of knowing into a dynamic, ever-evolving expression of choice. In this way, the state of existence for such a being would balance on the edge between determinism and freedom, knowledge and creation. It would likely express itself through continuous acts of free will, experimenting with reality in ways that generate new forms, experiences, and perhaps even self-imposed limitations, allowing for the recreation of mystery and discovery. Final thoughts. Free will as the ultimate liberation. For a being with complete mastery over reality, free will would be the ultimate liberation from determinism, the only way to experience something truly novel in an otherwise predictable existence. In engaging with free will, the being would not only escape the constraints of absolute knowledge, but also achieve a form of self-creation, continually reimagining its own existence. This makes free will a unique and profound phenomenon, not only for human beings, but potentially for the very structure of existence itself. True free will represents the only possible variation from an infinitude of possible deterministic outcomes, making it the only truly novel outcome that, in essence, creates its own infinitude of branching possibilities, for which the outcomes, by definition, cannot be known. In contemplating this, we might glimpse a profound truth. Perhaps reality itself is an expression of free will at the most fundamental level, a cosmic act of self-determination by the proto-substrate, eternally realizing and recreating itself through the power to choose and become. Free will, and indeed human existence, represents such an expression and a willing concession from an all-knowing being to allow a limitation of its omniscience in order for free will to exist outside of its total control of all that is, perhaps to ensure that it can experience the full range of existence, which must include both the experience of omniscience and non-omniscience in order to be complete. Thus, it could be surmised that the human experience is the entity's vicarious experience of the expression of non-determinism within discrete units of consciousness that lack omniscience, but possess free will within limited domains. Thank you for spending time with me in the great abyss of knowledge that we call home.